there was a boy who was in our class who was 17 years old. And I was like, what the fuck is he doing in class?
And what grade were you?
7th grade.
Oh,
7th
wow.
or 8th.
That's crazy.
It was crazy. Yeah, he just kept falling out of school. And he was in there, and he started off at the beginning like, I'm just going to fucking do it this time. And I remember being in class, like I was like a little kid. He was like an adult. So I was like, this is crazy. And he fell off. He was in class for a couple days, and then he stopped. And I realized, like, oh, this poor guy. Like, he's never going to catch up. Like, he's fucked because now he feels like a loser, and he feels like he's so far behind. He can't even do it anymore, and so he just dropped out. But it was that kind of a neighborhood. There was a lot of criminals in my neighborhood.
I mean, the other thing is that school makes people feel really shitty in some ways. I always felt like a loser in school.
Me too.
I was always in trouble. I remember when I was in kindergarten, I was in first grade, I was in Mexico City. That's where I lived when I was little. And I have this one, I don't remember much about that time, but I remember this one day. We had desks with all our work in a desk that folded down, and all your papers were in there. And you had to keep it organized and keep handing stuff in, but I could never finish anything. So my desk was always like, I couldn't close it. And I hated this feeling, and the teachers, fucking angry Mexican teachers, would scream at me. And one day the teacher left us in the room alone, me and some kids for some reason, and I took all the papers and I threw them out the window. I opened the window and I threw all my papers out the window. And the kids were like, what? And they started screaming, and everybody started throwing papers out the window. It was like fucking
God.
Attica. It was just nuts. And then there was this pounding at the door, and the teacher, and I knew I'm in so much trouble right now. Like, I'm in beyond trouble, but it felt so good. It just felt so good to be like in this outside of the box.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to do that at all. But it felt free. I felt like some kind of adult or something, you know?
Isn't it funny, those moments of rebellion, like early on, that really sit with you? Like, it felt so good. It plants seeds for further rebellion in the future.
Well, once you get that feeling, you want it again and again, you know? Because it takes you out of everything.
Yeah.
It's like, I may never get out of this class. I may never finish any of these. I might not graduate. I might, you know?
Yeah.
But I'm right now. I'm throwing all this shit out the window.
I'm alive.
Yeah, exactly. It feels good for right now. And it's hard to reconcile that. I think that's a little bit of a comedian's like upbringing. And then you have to start being and you have kids and it all goes away. You have kids and you grow right out. Whatever's left, I think, when you have kids. I mean, not for everybody. There's some real douchebag parents. But for the most part, I think once the kids come, it's not about you anymore. It's about them. So.
And it's also it's bizarre watching them go through it. Them going through, like, trying to find their identity and trying to find their friends group and little disputes that they have in their friends group.
Yeah.
Like, one of my daughters has this one little daughter, one little friend rather, who's, I don't want to say she's evil, but something's wrong. Something's wrong. She's just like always like very mean to the other girls and very insulting and for whatever reason, this girl just has like this fire inside of her. And all the other 12-year-olds are starting to figure it out now. So they're starting to separate from her. Like, they gave her a few chances.
Right.
And so now the mom is contacting the other moms like, what's wrong? She's such a sweet girl. I'm like, no, your daughter's kind of a cunt. And it's like this, it's weird. And then, me and my wife are having this conversation. I'm like, do you think it's the mom? Like, who do you think? Like, where's this coming from? Do you think it's the family? Like, how does a daughter get to be so insulting and shitty?
Yeah.
You got to learn that. You can't just be like the sweetest, kindest person in the world and have this fucking hyper aggressive,
something's
shitty
going
baby.
on. I mean, there's people like, I remember there was a kid when I grew up, and he was a mess. And he was huge. He just got really huge. In third grade, he was he was bigger than all of us. And he was a really bright kid. And he was funny and interesting. But he had this crazy temper. And he would throw these tantrums in the middle of class. Like, something would piss him off, and he'd start screaming and throwing shit. And he'd get violent. And the teacher would go to back then there was like a box on the side of the classroom wall with a clock and a speaker and a button, like a microphone, like to call the office. And they'd call the office and say, get Mr. Shanahan. He was our one teacher who was big enough to handle this kid. And he would come and just subdue him. He'd wrap his arms around this kid, and the kid's face would be purple. And Mr. Shanahan would just subdue him until he ran out of, he would just collapse. And we would all sit there and watch this. And then he'd be taken out of the classroom, and then we'd all talk about him. But like the teacher would say, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
What do you think's going on with John, and how do we handle this?
Oh, that's cool.
He's in our communities, in our class.
Oh, that's a great teacher.
He was great. Mr. Weisberg, great teacher. And then I was always in John's class, 4th grade, 5th grade. And in 5th grade, we had a trip to Cape Cod. The whole 5th grade class goes in cars in a caravan, to Cape Cod. And you live in tents and you visit the cranberry bogs, whatever the fuck you do in Cape Cod. And it's a very social thing, So somebody's mom is driving. So they're like, will you come in my car? That was the cool thing. And I got invited to be in Jeff Drew's car. And I was like, this is going to be, I love Jeff Drew. It's going to be me and him and Mike McDougal. We're going to have a great time. But the teacher pulled me aside and he said, listen, John, the fucked up kid, he goes, his parents have offered to drive and nobody wants to drive with him. And I'm asking you to do it.
Oh, boy.
And I was like, I don't want to do that. And he said, I'm asking you because I think you're a nice person, and you're the one person I can think of that I could ask, could you make this sacrifice and let him not feel so isolated? And I was like, fuck. And that made me feel good that he wanted me to do it. And I did it. And I got to know him, and he was a really cool kid, and his parents were both professors. Really, really bright people.
Oh, wow.
His father had killed himself, but his stepfather and his mother were professors, really intelligent people.
That's probably where it came from.
I think so.
Yeah.
It was really hard. His life was really hard. And then I knew him for years after that. We were friends, but he would always explode all the way until 17 or so. The last time I saw him, he was like 16, I think. And he was still we were talking outside of a Brigham's ice cream in Newton Center. And he was leaning on the glass of the window, and this guy came outside and said, don't lean on the glass. And so he kicked it and shattered the whole window. And I walked away. I'm like, I don't ever want to see this kid again.
Oh, Jesus.
But anyway, just to say that, the point of it is I tried to stay friends with that kid. When there's a kid who's really fucked up and has a wire loose, someone's got to be their friend.